You've found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic. To bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann. And a very good day to you guys. John out there in Florida, it's close to the end of your day, and Barry out there in Australia, it's the future, man. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, guys. Yep.
What a great time to be getting together for a conversation like this. We need to be more connected globally, and I am so glad, Barry, that John found you. John, why don't you give Barry an intro, because you know about him, and then we'll take off and have a great conversation.
Well, thank you for that. And it's great to see both you guys. And you're right. We need to patch in these global networks and use these tools so we can tell stories and share and help each other. But, Barry's an interesting guy, and, he's wearing that shirt. Barry's probably one of the most mindful veterans that I've ever met. And we did meet on LinkedIn. I'm not sure how, but through a network. And Barry actually has a fascinating story. He's a veteran of the Rhodesian Bush War back in the 70s. He was doing some really interesting things then. In fact, we had Barry on the Straight Out Combat radio show, Bill. And I got to tell you, so Barry, described some of those and what it was like in South Africa. Of course, Rhodesia went on to be Zimbabwe. And we all know what happened to Zimbabwe. So Barry was there when the breadbasket of Africa was at its best. And then, he traveled and did some things. I think he went up north to the UK and tried to ride his bike all the way to Israel. I think he maybe did do that. And then eventually, did you do that? Did you get that done, Barry?
No, John, I think I'd had a fair dose of pollen allergies and phased out a little bit through the trip.
Well, I know you were planning on it, but Barry was, dealing with things, from the Bush War, and he eventually made it down the land down under, which is where he's at now in the great city of Sydney, Australia. And, Australia itself is a lot like America. We're a bunch of people with big dreams. And what I like about Barry, Bill, is as a veteran, Barry's written a couple of books and he's got some interesting books. We'll talk about those, but I go by Barry. I call him Barry Z. Zworestine is Zworestine. I don't want to bastardize it.
So that's all right, mate. Zworestine.
But Zworestine. And so I just call him Z and he's okay with that. But
yeah, cool.
He's doing brain spotting and he's playing music. And Bill, who loves music, knows how the integration of that and the healing. But anyhow, enough of me talking. Very blessed to have Barry here. He's a Rhodesian, displaced kind of to Australia now, doing some amazing things in the veteran world. And like I said, probably one of those mindful freaking veterans that you'll ever meet. Thanks for being on the show, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity just to share conversation with you.
It's Absolutely. Great to be in contact with other veterans. I'm not a veteran myself, big military family, but we sometimes forget over here in a little corner of San Diego that, veterans actually exist in other places in the States, let alone in other places in the world. Yeah. And that people like Barry are doing this amazing thing. So Barry, what made you decide to keep going in service, giving back to veterans the way that you do now?
I think it was an emerging thing. I think inherent almost in my personality is the need for service. But it really hadn't, I was a teacher. I started off as a teacher, which was ridiculous because I was an English teacher and I had a couple of learning difficulties. School was an abysmal failure apart from sport. And I was really uncertain about what to do. Said to my parents, what do I do? They said, become a high school English teacher. So, so 4 years down the line with a degree and a postgraduate diploma in education, I decided I was never going to put foot in a high school. And then I was in the Rhodesian Bush War, came out, still continued with the thought of being in service, which was, I said to somebody in South Africa, I said, look, if I don't get out the Bush War, I'm going to go out feet first. So I said, what can I do? And they
You were a medic, right? You were a medic in the Bush War.
I was a fighting medic. So I worked we worked in 4-man sticks. And we operated in the bush. So in my stick, you had your stick leader, machine gunner, 2 riflemen, of which I was one, and I was the combat medic. So if stuff happened, the choppers would come down, pick them up, take them off, and then we would carry on.
Yeah.
So I got out, but I eventually went back to university and said, I said to a mate of mine, what can I do? And he said, become a speech and hearing correctionist. That's all you can do. So I became a speech and hearing correctionist, and so then meandered around the world endlessly doing a number of things, and eventually got into psychology. So I think, Bill, service has always been a part of my almost my genetic kind of vision. And as soon as I arrived in Australia, I started off in another place in Adelaide, and I got into child and adolescent mental health services. But then the Vietnam veterans got permission to employ external contractors. I left there, arrived in Sydney, said, look, guys, this is who I am. And they took me on. So for nearly 19 years, I've been in service. And I think in many ways, my service to veterans grew over time. I started off on the basis of that, you know, I was a combat veteran, and that I'd emerged well, and that I was here to support the guys. Well, humility began to set in after a couple of years when I realized that, you know, I was still packing stuff, and that in a sense, I was sitting with brothers and we were in a journey together, just that I was not there for their story. Yes. But I realized that with every man, and predominantly the men in those days, because they were the Vietnam boys, the men I've sat with, and some of the women, that through my conversations with them, I was becoming a better human being as much as I was impacting on their lives. And over the years, my drive for service has just got stronger and stronger. So that's a fairly lengthy, brief summary of my journey in service.
No, that's great. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just gonna say, I feel that because I haven't served, but I have this drive for service that's sort of escalated over the last maybe 20 years. And volunteering's been a big part of that. So I really get that, the pull toward being useful, you know?
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I feel that I always suggest to people, think about some quality of service, because the idea of service is that you put something in without wanting anything in return.
Yes.
And, you know, outside of my paid work with the veteran organization here in Australia, everything else I do is of service only. And that's probably the greatest joy in my life, is actually to have the opportunity to be of service and allow people for me to be of service to them.
Yeah, you know, you said something really interesting there that I hope people caught, about being paid for services, you know, and a lot of people these days, and it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because a lot of people these days, they're just all in it for the money. And I think that when you're in a healing service type of situation, it's a little bit different. You know, you go from a combat, basically an infantryman medic, you know, back into the workforce. You get your English teaching degree, and then some corrective therapy. How did your experiences, Z, in, you know, boots on the ground in real combat, how did those experiences help you get a grasp into the service world of healing?
Look, I think the one thing was I came away with the fact that life is a gift at a daily level. You know, I remember at about 2 o'clock in the morning, we were in a bush camp, and I think 4 or 5 or 6 of us were called out. There'd been a contact along one of the dirt roads, and a Jeep had been hit. And we cleared the area, and I went in and patched up a bloke who'd been shot through the shoulder, and then his companion who was in the Jeep, I think they were police, he was burning like a barbecue. So I put him out, and we took him back to base camp. And I remember working on him and trying to get a tube down his throat. And it was impossible. I mean, he was so badly burnt. It was almost 100% burns. And I remember that last breath to this day. And I remember this long, drawn out breath just echoing its way through the tops of the trees at about 3:30 in the morning. And that memory of that active breath leaving the body, I realized, geez, you know, life is a fragile thing, and that we need to be able to treat life with the greatest respect and gratitude. And that has always stayed at the back of my brain. sorry, John, what was your question?
No. That was excellent. You answered it.
Yeah.
Your wartime experiences, and it's interesting,
Yeah.
G, because I've met so many veterans. Of course, I'm a non-combat veteran. It
Yeah.
just my time is
Yeah.
probably a good thing, but most of the combat veterans that I've talked to, it's amazing how there's this transformation when they're that close to death. There seems to be, and you seem to have handled it really well. I'm sure you've had your moments, but there seems to be a transformation about what you just said, Z. And thank you for sharing that, because life is precious. And as a trained soldier myself, you don't know how it's going to go down when you get there, but is it kind of killing like the last thing or the lowest thing that humans can do?
What do they call it? The nobility of the savage, the nobility of the warrior. I think I don't see war as the lowest form of existence. I see there's a nobility in terms of how we describe the warrior, even at an archetypal level. Right. The warrior has impeccable values. The warrior will not take life for pleasure. The warrior will do what he does and choose when he chooses to do it, and use judgment. War is run by generally people one hopes with people who have impeccable values of the warrior values: dependability, reliability. So no, I think it's a profound learning experience. I'm not sure that I'd recommend everyone to repeat that. But I do believe the very act of national service, for example, what did we learn? We learned to do our pull-throughs, clean our weapons, make our beds. Now, those little things, that's the other 50% of what I've taken into my life, is a sense that the little things we do, which may be uncomfortable, but we have to do them every single day. So it's that zone of becoming comfortable with discomfort and discipline. Those are the things that keep us in the driver's seat. So with everyone I work with, I'll always have a conversation about, look, you're in the back seat at the moment. You're drinking, your sleep, your food, your alcohol consumption. You're not exercising. Let's look at what you can do. Let's look at your pull-throughs. We look at, and a pull-through, for those that are not aware of them, is the act of cleaning the barrel of a weapon. And if you don't clean the barrel of your weapon, three things are going to happen. You're going to have an accidental discharge, which means you shoot your mouth off. You're going to have a stoppage, which would be your depression or anxiety, or you're going to have a runaway gun, which is uncontrollable firing off, which is when we really lose control over our behavior. Yeah. And so I start off on everything. Let's get back in the driver's seat. What are you going to do every day? Go fetch the post, go for a walk around the block. I have a list, my wife just shakes her head at me, a list of disciplines that I do, every day, whether it's I now have my new thing. I always have new things, which is I'm determined to have 365 days of cold showers only. Because
you were telling me about that.
Yeah. I love Wim Hof. But I talk to the guys about, the Wim Hof breathing or the cold showers. I wake up every morning and I make the bed, or my wife will make the bed. I'll get up and I'll do my pull-throughs. It's a series of bilateral crossing over exercises. They're all mind and brain body-based things, which align the body and get me ready for the day. I'll still run. So it's doing what you would normally not do, because it takes effort and discipline. But when we do that, we're in the driver's seat. No matter the storm around us, at least we're in the driver's seat through that storm. Simple stuff.
Yes.
You pointed out, this is really cool, because one of the reasons we even did Strata Combat, and of course AHO Radio, was to have real conversation. But there's always this stereotype in the non-veteran community that, veterans, you just so eloquently talked about the warrior frame of mind and the warrior behaviors. But a lot of people think that that veterans are just crazed animals, intent on, it's sometimes it's how we're portrayed in the media or in the, the stuff that's out there. And it's important to remember that they're people just like they are. They just have a different set of events that have happened and experiences in their life. And I like the way you pointed that out, because it is important to remember that despite the fact that they may have seen some horrific things that maybe a civilian hasn't seen, it's important to remember that there's still this human connection.
John, and I think I've always said that I think the warrior, the soldier, the veteran, the military serving person, they're very good values. And I often say to the veterans I work with, would you leave a man behind? And they go, you got to be joking. I go, so how come you've left yourself behind? And that increasingly, as I've thought about transitioning, and I mean, I think the same rules apply to anyone really, but transitioning is about never leaving yourself behind. It's about going back and doing two things. You've got two rescue missions. The one is you need to heal the wounded parts of yourself. So it may even be in a job you left as you transition to a new job, or as you transition to a new country, or as you transition out of a failed marriage to a new relationship. You need to heal your wounds. And the second one is that you need to identify your strengths and your positive qualities. You need to bring it back. And in the military environment, I say, when you combine that, the healed parts of yourself with your strengths with the civilian person, what you get, I think, in many ways, is a better human being. It's almost a cross-species pollination.
Absolutely.
And I believe that's very important in transitioning. Never leave ourselves behind. Never judge ourselves. Never demean or diminish ourselves. Just go back and rescue who you were, because there's wisdom still in that place.
Absolutely.
This tracks so well. Well.
I love that, because you have been able to take these metaphors from the language of the combat experienced soldier and taken those into the civilian healing sector. And I think that's just fascinating and relevant.
I think one of my learning was that when I came out the Bush War, I don't think I had PTSD. I think I had more combat stress, which is just a level of hyperarousal and your body and your brain still working on that level of alertness. And over the years, I started running, and eventually I went from 20Ks to the 42Ks, and then I was doing ultra marathons. And I remember that I always used to look for the wall, and in a way I still do. But after 2 ultra marathons in 1990, somebody looked at me and they said, hey, I want to ask you a question. And I said, what? And they said, what are you running away from? And you know what, it was a bit of a kick in the guts, but when I reflected on that, I realized that I was using my body to avoid dealing with the more deeper stuff. And that at the core of who I was, there was a room with grief and loss, and not just grief and loss in a military context, but because post-army, I went through a couple of really interesting connections and losses around that, and some of those were extremely difficult to deal with. There were moments I'd sit in the corner of a room and I could almost feel the walls moving in, but all I had to stay coherent was my physical capability, and it was important, but it also wasn't enough. And so increasingly I explain to people that be careful. You can channel your wound and your pain into extreme sports, but in the room there's still things, there are little voices that still need to be heard, and they're not going to be healed by what you're doing. So what happens when chronology catches up with you and you can't keep doing it? I can't run 84 kilometers uphill anymore. But I can go, which I did, but I can go into the bush here and I can run on rough track. I've even had to learn to moderate, because once or twice a year I choose, I don't know what, it's 42 degrees centigrade, which is about 90 to 100 or something.
Yeah, it's pretty hot.
And I run in that, but I realized that I was placing myself at risk. So it's continually, we win levels of adjustment where we have to find new ways to work with what's inside us, with who we are and our well-being. It's a continual state of adjustment till we leave our last breath. For everyone.
I'm processing all of this because it is so fascinating to hear you explain back to me something that I kind of thought about but hadn't ever really heard articulated this way. And I know plenty of veterans, and many of them are in that place where they're like, a lot of them do MMA, and then they have a rap session afterward, right? Because that helps release the stress. But But I wonder how prevalent that, I want to call it the soldier's heart is to keep on fighting, in spite of it. And even if you're in a civilian environment, not being able to let that part of you go or transform that part of you into something that is more useful, I guess, in a non-combat arena.
Yeah, I think there's a transformation, Bill, that is needed, and part of that transformation is the healing. I would say that probably over 90% of the people I've sat with, sure, there's anger and anxiety, stress, overwhelm, the usual things.
Yes.
But often when you start to scratch away, you find grief, deep, deep grief. And as we all know, grief locked away can become extremely toxic. It can drive us, it amplifies everything else. It's easy to be angry. It's very uncomfortable to grieve. And I mean, I put myself still in that box. We'll be watching some kind of a film and it resonates. And now I look left and my wife's watching me and she'll say, "How are you?" And I go, "I'm fine." She goes, "No, you're not." I go, "Trust me, I'm fine." Next thing, there's an arm around me and I'm in tears. So, and I know I'm uncomfortable. And I've realized that one doesn't just walk into grief with a yeehaw. We walk into grief. It's hard work. And as warriors heal their grief, they become better at doing what they need to do to be extraordinary human beings. As human beings heal their grief, those that have come from abused backgrounds, challenging early histories, losses, divorce breakups, whatever it may be, we need to heal that grief. Otherwise, we compensate. The body naturally wants to compensate. When it stops wanting to compensate, we eat too much, we sleep too much, we drink too much, and we go downhill.
Sure.
Yeah.
We cease thriving. We're just into surviving.
So that's a great,
I have a loaded question on this one because I'm somewhat of an expert on grief.
Yeah.
through no fault of my own, I just happen to be. But I'm curious what you would say to someone who is like, "Barry, I've already grieved this. I'm done with this. Why does it keep coming around? What's the deal here?"
So what I often say is that people may have been into the kind of modalities where they're working at the front of the brain, the thinking of the grief, the talking about the territory of the grief. And within that, there's a certain amount of emotionality that's involved, because the minute we raise memory, we raise emotion. There's an automatically, the brain file on memory is going to be tapping into the emotion.
Yeah.
However, there's stuff here, but at the back of the brain. So the talking cure doesn't get there. And so often you'll hear people saying, "Look, I spent 3 years and I understand what I went through and I'm a bit more at peace, but there's stuff I can't get rid of."
Yeah.
Because that's here. So that's when we move into, when you think about that situation, where do you feel it in your body? What I want you to do is stay with the feeling in your body. Now we're working within the body and we're using whatever modalities. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, is one of them. And we're going back here. And that's why to truly heal, the front of the brain won't go back here. It won't. It's other territory, locked and on the left. We have to find ways that open the body. It's what I call a bottom-up approach. So as much as we need a top-down through memory and conversation, we need to go into the body up and allow the body to free itself.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm as you describe it, Barry, and I'm thinking about two things. I'm thinking about a buddy of mine. We used to do this high altitude climbing. Yeah. And it's kind of like, the military. It's real tough. It's high altitude. You can't breathe. You got headaches, you're getting cerebral edema. It's like, who wants to climb above the dead zone, right? Yeah. But I asked him one time, I said, we could be at Club Med right now. What the hell are we doing? Yeah. And I said, what is climbing to you? And it stuck on me. We're on the side of a glacier, man, in Mexico, right? And he goes, "It's whoever suffers the best." So I kind of took that back to the real world, and Bill talked about, what triggers, we can't escape the triggers. The triggers are going to come. There's going to be something that tweaks us. And for me personally, with the stuff that's happened in my life,
Yeah.
I gotta be straight up, man. It doesn't get better, but what happens is it gets different. And
Yes.
the coping skills that you learn, that embedded stuff that happened, maybe I need the brain spot and I want to talk about that, but those triggers and the memories of those traumatic events,
Yeah.
that stuff is deep, man. And
Yes.
it's not going away. It's
No.
going to surface, like you just said, you're watching a movie and your wife's looking at you and she's watching you. She knows you pretty good. And I'm okay, but that's, so, and Bill's question, I think it's a matter of all coping skills and whoever can suffer through it the best.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the metaphor of the samurai sword, that samurai sword is a piece of metal put into fire, comes out, we hammer it out, we fold it back in the fire, hammered out. Now, what you have at the end is layers and layers of fine metal on top of each other, resulting in an extremely flexible but incredibly efficient weapon. Now, I think as human beings, we get thrown into fires, we get hammered out, folded back, fire, hammered out. Now, if we use those to transform, then what happens is we have layers of flexibility and / wisdom / insight / resilience.
Yeah.
So those fires have the potential to either burn and destroy, or they have the potential, if we work with them and we maintain all the protocols to look after ourselves while we're going through the fires, we come out with layers of wisdom, experience, and strength, and heart-opening compassion.
Awesome analogy, man. That's pretty cool. And I'm gonna keep that close to me because that's an excellent way of describing what life does. We're all samurai swords, and that's just really cool the way you describe that.
Well, John, if you think about it, those old stone mills that used to grind corn in the good old days.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
This came to me once on a run when I was living in South Africa. I used to go running up in the mountains, and I realized that a lot of people prefer the two stones to have a distance. They just go round and round and round, but you're not going to grind flour. There's nothing productive happening there. Then there are other people that get really stressed. They just get in there and the stones are grinding away. And yeah, you're grinding your flour, but there's pieces of rock and it's a mess. Plus you're destroying the grinding wheel. What we want in life is a certain amount of grinding, because without grinding, there's nothing productive that's happening. And so, marriages or relationships where people are completely avoiding conflict is a recipe for disaster. Relationships where people are just going in there like this is a recipe for disaster.
It's funny you say that, man. I had a really good friend once, and he says to me, he goes, we never fight. My wife and I, we never fight.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, that's great. I think they were married for 3 years, and and here we are 30 years later, and you're so right. And avoiding conflict may seem like the right thing to do at the time, but it is a way of grinding, and it's a way of polishing that stone,
correct,
to move forward in life.
Correct, John. And so in a way, we need to search out little moments of discomfort, because two things happen in discomfort. The one is we grind, and that's like polishing a stone. The jewel, the beauty of it actually comes out.
Yeah.
The second one is I always maintain, depending on the level of discomfort, people ask me, when you run up a hill, I go, there's several hills. There's the one ancestor hill. You only talk to one of them. And then there are those ones like this where you talk to maybe about 6 of them. And geez, they have some serious conversations with you on the way up there. and so part of the discomfort is having conversations with your ancestors, and your ancestors will say, I hear you want to stop, don't you? You just want to give up and get out of it. The other ancestor will tell you, look, hang in here. So that discomfort, in whatever way you can, that is not overwhelming, but that is within your parameters of coping, but is out of your easy zone, that is the way to heal it. Yeah. How do we heal? How do we have relationships if we are avoiding discomfort?
I'm so with you on this. I'm just like churning back here in there's so much popular thought and even a lot of spiritual thought that says the only way is up. Don't ever look back. Don't take the hard road. It's like New Age thought is all about this infinite progression upwards. Then it doesn't
Yep.
have any grinding in it.
No grinding. And you know, Bill,
No.
I've meditated for 47 years. And I said to my wife one day, damn, this is hard work. You know, I just sit and I knock at this goddamn door and I can sit for, you know, when I'm really in my zone, I'll sit for 2.5 hours and it's just like, and I said, my biggest fear is on my dying bed, this voice is going to say, you've lived an illusion all your life.
and you're coming back, right?
47 years of just sitting. And you know, so it is even spirituality, you know, if it's a bungee jump, I have interesting ideas about that one, you know, but boy, it's hard work. Everything is work, Bill, and I don't mean work as in a bad way.
No.
But it's work.
That's a good 4-letter word, and so many people shy away from that word. And I remember when I was going through my own stuff, Z, it was 3 months into this one-on-one cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with my own monkeys, right? Yeah. And she's smiling at me kind of funny. And I said, you know, what's up? Tell me what's up, Cheryl. And she goes, you know what, man? She goes, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm smiling because you're doing the work. And it's not easy to heal yourself. You know, there's a lot of come to Jesus moments or come to spirit moments or whatever you want to call them. And you have to face those demons. You know, if you don't, you know, in fact, this is a good time to mention, and we want to talk about your book, C, but Bill sent me this book by Robert Johnson called Own Your Own Shadow. And in this book, I don't know if you've read it, but, you know, everything about healing in life is not always hunky-dory. We would like it to be. But if it was like that, like you say, Z, who's going to get better? If everything's like marmalade and honey and you know, green tea forever, right? You have to get in there and you have to dog it out to fix the things that you need to rearrange in your life. And yeah, you've had some awesome metaphors, and the title of one of your books is about which way is the claymore facing, right? And we know what a claymore does, right? So talk to us about the title of the book, but talk to us about what's in that book and why it's an important read for us.
Look, I think I was writing a lot initially within the Rhodesian kind of arena. I was just writing stuff. I don't even think I'd had a clue about LinkedIn until about 3 or so years ago. And then I thought, well, you know, maybe I want to make this more available to other people. And so I churned out this book over a period of 6 weeks, just putting everything together and reorganizing it. And at that point, Amazon had their own publishing organization.
Sure.
So it was a little book. You know, it's probably 1/4 inch thick, and so I published that and as an ebook, and then the idea was that a person could buy it, stick it in their back pocket, and it had all the wisdom I gained from running and everything that I've been talking about today. And then it kind of progressed from there, and I realized over the last couple of years that I was focusing on the transitional process a lot. And I often say I don't think the transitioning process has been mapped out as well as it should. And so men and women are entering the territory with a compass that's not exactly well orientated, and territory that's not as well defined as it should be. And that's when I wrote Which Way is Your Warrior Facing? And I thought, well, I just want to do something as a free book. And so I just bunged in, I found a whole lot of my old photographs from running, and it was a bit more of me in it. And I just slapped it all together in a free PDF. And that's available free. Anybody can download that PDF and throw it around as much as they want. I was going to be writing the third book, and that was going to be a book, but you know, I'm not sure. I don't know if people really buy a lot of books. My goal at the moment is at some point to create a PowerPoint presentation of the Warrior book. And then talk to that, and then just throw that out to everybody. I think people will listen more than they will read. So the books are just a way of sharing, I think, lessons that are applicable. They're life lessons. that anybody can use, and also for veterans to give them some idea of their territory. So perhaps while they're working through counseling, or while they're waiting to go to counseling, or while they might not even be thinking about counseling, but go, I'm a bit confused with my own territory. There's something there that can orientate them and give them a bit of a breath to figure out how to move forward.
Yeah.
This is sort of a loaded question, but it seems appropriate right now. In your sense of doing this work, Barry, and you've been in it for a while, are we moving the needle? Are we actually making an improvement in veterans transition, or whatever the typical issue might be, post-traumatic stress? What's your sense of
Look,
that?
I think we've made a hell of a lot of progress. I mean, I can speak a lot from my own organization, Open Arms, who I work for, and over the 18 odd years that I've been with them, they've evolved and grown, and they have peer mentors now, so men and women who have been on the ground in the military, and I think they've made a lot of progress. I think the fact that we still have such large numbers of veterans deciding that they can no longer live is a concern. And I often say that perhaps we are not just part of the solution, but we also may be part of the problem in terms of what are we doing and what are we not doing. I know that sometimes what I did a while ago, I realized that, we have PTSD, we have post-traumatic stress, and then there's combat stress. And then I thought of another category, and I called that category PMTC. I love acronyms. And it was post-military transitioning challenges. And I thought, well, a lot of the transitioning stuff is men and women get lost. That sense of who am I? I've lost my tribe. I've lost my mates. I don't belong. Maybe I was shifted out the military against, it was not what I wanted. So it might have a bit of a moral component to that.
Right.
Civilian life is not waiting for me. How do I translate my skill set into desirability in the civilian world? The financial pressures that may come with that. Now, your stress and anxiety is going to kick up. Your depression may kick up. You may suddenly feel like, well, life's not worth living. Now, is that PTSD or is that post-military transitioning challenges?
Yeah.
Because we lost in territory. So I thought, well, that could be an interesting category. And I think that if we're not understanding that transitioning has its impact and we're not really meeting those impacts effectively, well, maybe aspects of what we're seeing is because guys get lost and men and women get lost. And that sense of being in no man's land, it's almost like you become a ghost in your new life. Well, we don't want that to happen. So I think there's still a lot to do. I mean, I know that there are organizations more in America than we have in Australia, although they are coming up in Australia now, where veterans on the ground are starting very powerful organizations. They're materially strong, and they're offering all sorts of modalities, from putting people in nature and healing modalities, yoga, meditation, mindful meditation. They're offering guys a variety of alternative modalities. And I think they're meeting people in terms of gathering them back into tribe. So I think there's probably a lot more that needs to be done, but there's some really good things happening at the moment. And the other thing is, unfortunately, there's a line where you can be exposed to so much that you lose a part of who you are. And in that loss, people lose a will to live. And that is always tragic. But I think there are things we can do.
We have that concern for suicide over here in America too, and not just veteran suicide, which is too high, but suicide is just because of COVID, it's blowing up. And the issues of meaning and all of that. But one specific part of combat is the need to take life. And there was a time in America where we were dealing with moral injury. And how a soldier would reconcile the need to take a life with their belief set, which is killing is wrong. Do you have a skillful response to someone in that dilemma?
It took me, I guess I tracked it within myself, because I became a vegetarian in 1973. So 1974, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1976, 7, I was in the Rhodesian Bush War. And as a vegetarian, which completely freaked them out, because what were they going to give me? What were my rat packs, or I don't know what you call them, but your
Yeah.
Corn on
what
the
were the,
cob, right?
so, and how does a vegetarian get into a war? And it only many years ago I realized that I was tracking that in everyone I was sitting with, there were two people. There was the part that was wired to take life. Now, John, whether you were in combat or not, you wired prior to that. Because if you're not wired and you're in a situation where you need to take life, you're not going to be able to do it. So already in every person who's gone through the military, you can take life. Now, I had a very powerful experience where 4 of us were on patrol and we saw what looked like 6 people a couple of 100 meters away walking in overalls, carrying what looked like weapons over their shoulder. And so the stick leader was a tracker, and he and I decided we were going to investigate this, and if they were terrorists, we were going to do what had to be done. And they went behind a hill. So he went around the hill. He said, look, I'm going to go around the hill. You go on top. And on my signal. And so I remember going up this hill, and my heart was beating, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. And then I remember getting on the hill and lining up. I could see a guy down below, and I'd lined up on him. And I remember that there was no voice saying, son, you're a vegetarian. Do you want to think about that? There was like, whoa, this is going to be interesting. And I realized that the challenge in our life is how we live with the tension of the contradiction between parts of us that are wired to kill, and it doesn't feel too difficult, and the parts of us that are wired to preserve life. And increasingly, I started talking to myself and to the people I was sitting with that it's okay. Those parts, the part that knows you can kill, is neither good nor bad. It's a part of you that forms the protector. And that's a very powerful part. And that's the part that people often value about veterans, is that they will stand up and fight for what they believe.
Yeah.
It's what you do with that part that determines who you are. But living with the fact that a part of you believes it can kill, and a part of you is a loving father, a loving husband, a loving friend, it's how you accept, value, and respect the two contradictory elements of yourself. And in many ways, a contradiction to some extent, but it's like the yin and the yang, the dark and the light of who we are.
Paradox.
And, I get back again to the shadow.
Right.
It's the shadow part, but shadow is not necessarily bad.
I agree.
No, and human conflict, it's not just an American thing. Human conflict and war and soldiers goes way back to recorded history with the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Greeks, and I'm sure those moral injuries have had to be looked at. And you eloquently put that in a way that I've never heard it described, because you're right. We did have hand-to-hand combat training, and we did throw hand grenades, and we did use bayonets, and then we all know what they're used for. And even in some of the hand-to-hand combat stuff that we were trained in, it's kind of interesting because, if you are wired that way, that you could kill somebody with your hands.
Exactly.
And so it's a great tribute to those soldiers and the women and the men who can contain that in a way that makes life and living beneficial,
Yeah, John.
Yeah, so I love the way you put that, because there are things that we need to continue to discuss. And in the world of healing, which is in some ways a universal consciousness, because we can speak the language of that, there's something really human about that and universal.
Correct.
I know that Bill plays the pianist. He's a concert pianist. And I know that you have had your fun playing music. I know you play a few instruments. How does music, this is for Bill, not Bill, but this is, Barry, but how does music play into anything that you do, Barry? And then is there anything that you can describe where music you felt made a difference in some of the people that you've worked with? I know that's your primary goal, but I know that
look, I think I can't pull out musical instruments with people I work with. I work for an organization, and we do have very specific modalities and approaches that we use. However, I remember working, before I was working with the military, I was working with a bloke, and he was carrying a lot of pain, and he was in my practice room, and I had my didge in the corner because I was playing that night. And he said to me, you know, you got a didge. He said, you know, look, I love this body-based stuff. Would you play the didge against me? And I said to him, look, generally no, but 5 minutes. And I put the didge against him, and the impact was profound. And then when my kids were born, they had a lot of colic. So they were in a lot of pain. And I'd put the didge against their tummies, and their little hands would hold the didge, and then I'd play this gentle drone, and I could just see the body relax. So I realized that sound has an amazing component. And that music and body-based things, whether it's yoga, anything working within the body, because that's really the common element here is music is felt within the body. It's not just felt within the mind. You know, when I'm playing, I used to run a community drumming circle for many years until a mate of mine took it over. And initially it was just two of us holding the heartbeat for the circle, but he built it into an extraordinary community. And when I would join that every couple of weeks, I would sit with, 10, 11, 12 drummers, those big drums, by the way, which I think yours, Bill, is the dun-dun. It's a very big thing that you do, that you hit.
Yeah.
And we would be working we would drum very fast. I mean, that speed and that feeling in the body. And there's something quite transpersonal about that. There just is. As soon as you lock in the body, whether you're running in heat, whether you're doing something with your body, there's something that moves in time and outside of time.
Yes.
So, yeah, look, I think inviting people to go into those kind of modalities, using music, listening to music, incredibly powerful. It gets deep into the body, deep into the back of the brain.
I love your stories about feeling the vibration, like actually against your body.
Totally, Bill.
That says so much to me. I'm not deaf, but there is a percussionist, a professional percussionist who is deaf and who plays just by feeling the vibration of the orchestra through the floor. She plays barefoot.
Yeah.
And so I know that there's so many ways to hear that are not involved, that don't involve the ears.
Yeah.
And that reaching through at that level is it's transformative. I mean, that you got to do that with your own children is beautiful, Barry.
Yeah, it was an amazing. And my oldest son, he eventually, I took him when my kids were 13. I took them into the bush, and walked the hell out of them. But we each made a ritual instrument, and he made a didgeridoo, a PVC pipe, and with some wax on the top, and he learned to play in 2 seconds. It took me 6 months of just going, how do you breathe in and out at the same time?
The youth, right? The youth of today.
Yeah. And he was naturally attracted to that, and I think part of it was because they all had this experience of sound in their bodies, and we know sound healing.
Yes,
that's awesome.
So the bowls. So yeah.
I have a loaded question for you because, well, it's not that loaded, but
okay.
We've all seen the movies where people are, they enlist and they get off the bus at boot camp, and it's just one thing after another. So imagine that you're one of the people who gets to greet those young kids who have arrived for their very first moment in service. What do you say to them?
It's interesting, Bill, because the first thing was, well, there's the other side of me, which has a compassionate conversation with people. But when you're inviting people to go to war, if we're giving them hugs and cuddles and we're telling them it's going to be fine, well, it's not going to be fine. And so there's something in terms of what's said and the chaos that ensues, and then kicking them out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and giving them change parades the entire night, taking away their sleep, reducing their food. There's a kindness and a compassion in that. And so as you said that, another part of me went, well, maybe it's about having a compassionate conversation, but I'm not sure that would be the solution, because you're training people to be able to do some extremely difficult things under extremely trying situations. And so, often in the special operations world, when you look at some of the selections of, whether it's a SEAL selection, for example, in Hell Week, there's nothing nice. Nobody's having polite conversations. When you're doing SAS selection, nobody's even saying to you, well done, just keep going. It's silence. And so sometimes I think, Bill, that the way you greeted in a flurry of chaos and confusion is the greatest kindness that is being done to you.
But what's to say, Z? You train how you fight.
Yeah,
and,
you do.
And war, you want to win. That's kind of the object. And if you train like a bunch of leprechauns just floating around loving on each other, the minute you come across some of those Navy SEALs, you're toast. And so
correct.
I love what you said though, man, because wow, I've never heard it, but a lot of good stuff here today. It almost is an act of compassion.
Of course it is.
To treat these guys rough, because you're only going to help them survive on the battlefield. I remember I thought I had made a mistake the first day I got off the bus. I'm like, holy cow. These guys are screaming and yelling. They got automatic weapons. Yeah. They're screaming about blood makes the grass grow. And I'm like, put me back on the bus. I'm not ready for this. And in short order, you didn't have a choice. You signed up for it, and that's what happened. Signed up.
I love your answer because it all is there to set up the follow-up question, which is right in your lane. Now you're getting off the bus at into service. And Barry, you're standing there. What do you say to that person now?
What do I say to the person getting off the bus about to start his training?
Civilian life. No, civilian life.
Civilian life.
Yeah.
What I often say to people is, and I say, I know you're struggling and I know you're suffering, but I want you to remember that who you were has a great nobility, it has strength, and it has deep core values of love, respect, the ability to sacrifice yourself for another. Let's acknowledge that you're struggling, but let's acknowledge that your struggle is not who you are. It's just the impacts and the bruises of what you went through. That's what I say.
But they still have to do the work. So
they got to do the work, and that's when I said challenges. Yeah, totally.
And that's not fun. That is not fun, and you got to be upfront and real with them. So that's another form of love, But you got, and that's great the way you said that. But it's still kind of the same thing almost. They're in for a long road to hoe if you're not honest with them.
Well, John, in 1973, I was watching a black and white television at university in my second year, and there was a thing called Comrades Marathon, which is run in South Africa, 1 year uphill, 1 year downhill. It's 84 kilometers. And I watched this and I went, this is insane. This is like, who the hell? Now, in 1990, I was in South Africa at the time, and I was back at university studying psychology, and I decided, well, I want to do this. And so one of the lecturers at university was a silver medal runner. And I said to him, look, will you mentor me? And he said, well, I will, but we need to have an agreement, is that it's not going to be easy, and I'm not going to be kind. When you saw, I'm not going to give compassion. And I went, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And, my training runs were like 42, 43 kilometers. Wow. And I'd go to him and I'd go, geez, my ankle's sore and my body's not, I think, my back, I don't know if this is working, but I'm not interested. He went, I contracted with you, and if you think you're going to get out of it, don't look to me for acceptance. He didn't give me an inch of compassion. If he had, I would have taken the exit route.
Yeah.
And as a result of him, I ran that 84 kilometers, and I'd done a 64, my first one, 32 down and 32 up, and run like the wind. So my ego was through the roof, and my sense of competence was through the roof. And at 64 kilometers, the iliotibial, the muscle on the side of my leg, went. But I'd bought the badge, the mug, the blazer, and I went, bugger this. I'm either going to run, walk, or crawl, but I'm going over that line. Now, those last 24 odd kilometers or 22 kilometers, that was the greatest run of my life, because I'd run out of everything and I was in absolute pain. That I talked to every ancestor, my ancestors and everybody else's on the race. I had a chat to them. And that was the greatest race of my life, was because I had learned to walk through the most horrifying adversity for me at the time. So, Bill, it's not a bad thing when our children suffer and we walk with them through the suffering.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing where the people we're supporting are suffering, but we whisper encouragement. We keep them in the discomfort and we stay with them with our hearts open. We love them and we walk with them step by step. We sit with them when they need to sit, but we encourage them. What I say, get up, dust off, and take another step.
That's beautiful. You know, it's
Amen.
called tough compassion. You know, Bill, you just made me
Yeah,
think about tough compassion. You know, you do,
yeah,
you know what, man? And you remember that, Z. Some of those sergeants,
yeah,
man, they
yeah,
did have big hearts. Some of those guys they were hardcore, but you could tell they were looking out for us. Yeah.
Well, you know, John, if they didn't do their job, two things were going to happen. You'd get killed or you would cause another person to be killed.
Yeah.
And so everything they do is driven by the desire to preserve life. Now, you know, when we raise our kids, it's not, we don't want to make our kids suffer, but we should never avoid the possibility of our kids facing tough challenges and doing the compassionate boundary setting to keep them in the heat of that journey.
Lovely.
You know, and I've seen with my boys, as I said, when they turned 13, you know, the one I took huge amounts of camping equipment, enough for 6 trips, and it was a kilometer walk in. And him and I walked 6 trips, lugging everything in on purpose. And the other one, I took him through, I think it was about a 25 or 30K walk, because that discomfort was important.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and I can see the changes in them as a result of those experiences. You know, they are extraordinary. I mean, my daughter is studying performing arts. You know, that's the ability to push through pain in your body.
Nice.
So, you know, 3 incredibly resilient children, you know, and those are because of those experiences of discomfort.
They're very fortunate, Barry. And,
Then we see, yeah, they
and
are.
so are the lives of those whom they're going to touch.
Well, you know, it's interesting. My oldest son is about to study psychology, and he has a desire for service. And my youngest son is a policeman in Melbourne over the last year and a half or so, nearly 2 years. And you know, he's also in service. So you know, they're in service. It's a part of how they're wired.
Incredible. That's and you're right, Bill, because they're gonna bring you know, a certain act of service, but a joy to humankind, and that's kind of all really any of us want to do. You know,
Correct.
I know that we didn't get the brain spotting today. It's getting towards the end of the hour, but we'll have to have Barry come back. But check out his website. How do we get in touch, Barry? How do we find out more about you? Let us know. Let the listeners know.
Look, anyone can get. I think probably the best way is through LinkedIn. I become a real LinkedIn. I think just because it's a great community. I've met, you know, you, John, and other John McCaskill, and also just, by the way, just a plug for John and Veterans Path, man. All of you out there, go to Veterans Path. This man is, he's a saint.
Incredible guy. And, you know, Barry wearing that shirt, by the way, is from a company that we're running. And because Barry bought that shirt, we sent money to Veterans Path. And that's how it works. You know, that's how the team works. And thank you for patronizing #Planet. It's not a plug for us, but kind of. But so go ahead.
No, it's meant to be a plug. I mean, I said to my wife, what am I going to wear? Because I normally don't dress at my best. And I want to wear this because, John, what you're doing is extraordinary. And what John McCaskill is doing with mindful meditation and healing and Veterans Path is extraordinary. And, you know, there are 2 good territories for people to embed in.
I just want to say, though, and this is, I'm getting ready for bed, right? It's a big time zone difference. And I just happened to turn on my phone, ready to click it off. Yeah. And I see Barry wearing that shirt and put a huge post out there with his wife and different angles and all this. And I got to tell you, man, I was so excited because it's nice to see the program that we're part of working. And that meant the world to the people that we work with at #Planet, but also the Veterans Path to see you doing that. And to the veterans in Australia, they need to know that you're the real deal. You're there to help them. And I got to tell you, man, I slept like a baby that night that I saw that. And thank you for that. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. It's, and I always say, well, thank you to the three of you. I mean, I think when we have men and women out there who are in service, we're changing the world one leaf at a time. That forest will change.
Yes.
If that forest changes, less people have to go to the dark pits of despair.
I'm thinking of The Princess Bride, which is my favorite pit of despair.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, it's not that scary of a place. And Barry, I think you've done a good job at sort of inviting people to take more of a chance with the contradiction, and to be able to wander more into the dark place. I mean, I can't go on stage and leave my shadow off. I have to bring the shadow with me. It's part of who I am. Yeah. And it's not, a big scary thing. It's just the way it works.
Well, performing, Bill, I mean, I never like being on stage, and if I can fly under the radar, I will. But just standing there with my heart thumping, and I used to play with a group of 4 or 5 women called Mothers of Intention, who are Irish musicians, and work this one out with me with a tin whistle, a didgeridoo, and a djembe, an African drum. So, I'd get on stage and my heart was thumping like crazy, but that's part of what we want, is activate our bodies and step into the territory in the driver's seat.
Sure.
If you're in the driver's seat, you can drive through a storm.
It's you on the top of the hill again,
Yeah, you're back top of the hill. And I always say, you're back in the observation, the OP, the frontal part of your brain where you've disembedded from that ambush zone. And now you've got some distance and clarity, and the sun and the clouds are clearing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. What's your website, Barry? What's the website?
www.barry, Barry Zworestine, which is ZWORESTINE.com.
And
it needs to be tweaked a little bit.
If you're in
the book is, well, I would just suggest to people, just go and get Which Way is Your Warrior Facing. And I mean, if people will wait, because at the moment you've got to sign in to the website. And I said to my wife, look, I don't need people to sign in anywhere. I just want them to take that book. So we're going to look at how that can be done. So they don't have to give me an email address or give any information. I don't need that. I don't need anything from that. I just want them to be able to grab that book. So we're going to try and change that while I'm on holidays. And then they can go in there and download it and share it with whoever.
We'll
and people are free to contact me. So yeah, and people are free to contact me on LinkedIn as well and connect with me. That's not a problem.
That's perfect. Hopefully you'll have a flood of new people who are who aren't broken, but are in part of making the work more like #Planet and John has done, who are part of enlivening the work, right?
Yeah, I get to meet wonderful people. I mean, it's I've had the best ride of my life. I have talked and connected and made friends with, all like you guys, extraordinary human beings. And LinkedIn is generally a business-based platform. Well, I don't want anything. I don't want to make money out of LinkedIn. I'm just having fun doing what I do and connecting with extraordinary humans. That's the best way I can put it.
Awesome.
The feeling's mutual.
Yeah. That's how Bill and I met, was on LinkedIn. And it's fascinating to meet some of the world's greatest human beings. And I don't say that lightly, and I got to say the last 3 or 4 years of my life has been transitional. And when you can meet real people like Bill Protzmann and Barry Zworestine, that it makes this all worthwhile. And we're probably touching lives that we don't even know. And that makes it even all the more better. And I know you're a day ahead of us, so you're going to get into the new year before us. Yeah. And I just wanted to say happy New Year to your family and to all your mates down in Australia. And it's on my bucket list. I got to get down there. We got to go to Alice Springs. We got to go out.
Absolutely, brother.
I want to come down there. I was going to come this year. Yeah. And a friend of ours in Queensland was saying, you got to come down. But if we can get there, I'd love to come see you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any words of wisdom for us, Barry? Like, give us a New Year's benediction of some kind, or encouragement, or
what's your mantra?
I went through some tough moments, and I took 7 years off, and I left human beings. Well, I worked, but I left relationships alone because they weren't working very well for me. Yeah. But I did my work. I did my running. I meditated. I did work on myself, and I woke up after 7 years, and I had this vision of a dark female, and I went, huh? Because my history was tall blondes, and I went, there's a part of me that's opening, and I feel I'm ready to reconnect with the world. And at that point in time, my wife of today entered my life.
Awesome.
And I always say that I did the hard yards, but I really did everything I could to stay in the driver's seat of my vehicle through the storms that I was going through. And at the end of it, I ended up with the most extraordinary woman. And I often say that peace began at the age of 60 for me over the past 7 years of being with this incredible human being who's enriched my life and opened my heart. And so for those of you that are going through the dark spaces of your journey, all you have to do is maintain your protocols to keep you in the driver's seat. And you too can wake up and you'll embrace things that you didn't believe were possible. You can come back to who you were in an even better way.
Awesome.
That is one of the most beautiful things I've heard so far this year. And it's been
I mean,
quite a year, as you know.
phenomenal. It's been, we've had some of the craziest conversations, but this one is not crazy. This is relevant. And you're so right, Bill. It's been a joy to be with you as well. This is the last one we're going to do before the new year. So I wish you
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year too.
Happy New Year, guys. And thank you. Really, thank you.
Oh, Barry, thank you. And thank you to our sponsors, of course, #Planet, Green Zone Hero, and Music Care. Can't do this without you. Thank you to our audience. Subscribe, ring the bell. We'll see you next year. Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected. And, as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO.
Happy New Year.
AHO.